Welcome to Killer Cure. This is our podcast that really covers a lot of clinical knowledge and investing, things that are happening in our lives. And we have a special guest this week with Espen, who's going to do a quick intro, but is an expert in quantum breathing and a lot of different aspects of how breath can really affect your health. We're really going to dive into that topic. But first, I want to kind of resonate and explain how I met Espen. We went to a conference in the middle of New York, and he said some things to me and made sure that I participated in his breath work, which that's not something I do all the time. Just being completely candid around that. I do breathe. I don't forget to breathe. I do focus on actually breath when I'm working out and the things that I do, and taking in air, oxygen is important, but I've not done a ton of breath work. So it's something that was new to me and he exposed me to, and we got to know each other a bit, and his story was pretty compelling. So I really want to get his story out here and let him talk about what he does. But there were really three things, and I want to make sure that we make sure we touch on them. One, you questioned me about why I do what I do. And I think a lot of people here know what I do. I want to change healthcare, want to demonstrate how to do things differently and shift healthcare from reactive to proactive, right? What I do is out there. Like, we're pushing it. Like, what you do, you put out there, and you really want to make an impact. So I want to hear what you want to know what your legacy would be if I had it. You asked me that question, and not everybody asks that question. It's very insightful. You're on it. And so I would ask you to make sure we cover a few things. One, is that mission purpose for you, man? You've been driving at it, I can tell. Two, you said it's something unique, and I think it's something, and I said this to my kids every day as they were growing up: remember who you are. You said that to me multiple times, and I want to know where that came from for you. And then really, I think you're coming at it probably from, and I want to know, scientifically some, but also because you have faith in whatever is bigger. And I want to hear that too. So, first, why don't you start with introducing yourself and let people see what I see and what I've seen with you.
Well, thanks, Todd. It's an honor to be here, man. And you walked into the gathering, you stood tall, you had a beautiful glow about you, and you were pretty much the only person wearing a really cool shirt. So I was like, yeah, that guy.
Left my cool shirt on today, just t-shirt.
Man, but it was awesome. And as soon as we started having a conversation, I realized that you were absolutely at the peak of your game. What you're doing and what you're innovating in the medical and in the tech space is really going to and already changing the world. So I'm really honored and excited to be here. So for those who don't know me, my name is Dr. Espen Wold-Jensen. I'm born and raised in Norway, in Scandinavia. Lived there for 20 years, then moved to Australia in Norway. The little city that I'm born in Norway is called Arendale, which is really quite special. It's where the movie Frozen's from. So it's like a little mystical, weird, but gorgeous little place in Norway. And then I came to Australia 2005, 20 years ago. And it's been a wonderful journey. And I've realized over the years that, as I say, I'll drop the quote in and I'll come back to it: the greater the challenge, the greater the hero. I went through some lovely but challenging things growing up. I remember when I was 5, I found my brother passed away in his room. That became the first trauma that I experienced, the deep emotional trauma. Then my sister was born disabled. My mother didn't know how to deal with it. My father had left, so she became an alcoholic and tried her best. And then when I came to Australia, I had a motorcycle accident in 2006, broke both my legs, and almost died from a staph infection that I got from the hospital. So I have been through a lovely and interesting journey. And I remember the biggest breakthrough for me was a year after having gotten the infection. So I got the infection in 2007. In 2008, I was in hospital in Melbourne, Australia. I was laid up with intravenous heavy drugs pumped into my arm. I had lost 15 kilos because I had a systemic Staph aureus infection. So the infection was going through my whole body, and I was getting sicker and sicker, and I knew that I was dying. And I remember that the surgeon looked at his chart and looked at me and shook his head and said, "We have to amputate your leg." He said, "If we can cut off your leg from the hip and down, we can stop the infection." And he said, "If we don't amputate your leg, then you're going to die." And in that moment, something greater than me took over, and I started breathing in a very specific rhythm. And we now know that breath and life is the same thing. We can maybe touch on that topic. And I managed to heal myself using the power of breath. I had the infection for a year and 2 months. And I tried everything, every drug, every doctor, every surgeon, every nurse, every therapy, every potion, every lotion, you name it. But I almost died. And after a year and 2 months, I started breathing, doing breath work. And after 3.5 weeks, I completely healed myself. So that's why I've been traveling the world and teaching the power of breathing to, almost 250,000 people now.
Wow. I mean, it's a powerful story. I mean, so wherever you've been all over the world, right, teaching and doing things and meeting a lot of different people, when you think about healthcare and diverging from, just going back to that moment where you said, okay, traditional medicine's not going to work, right? You saw that. And I think that's indicative of where the healthcare system is today. Treat the symptom. Let's see, it's an infection. We got to cut the leg off. We're just going to get rid of the leg, right? Like it's that extreme. And you start to think about the problems in the healthcare system that you actually had to make a decision to step away from. And that's a very bold risk, right? You're risking your life. And I think tell us about that, maybe just a little bit more. Did you just not, I mean, you were clinical before, like you have been, and tell me about that divergence and how you came to that. That's a hard one. That's for a lot of people to swallow. So I'm curious.
Awesome question. And it's also important to note that, as I say to my patients and my students, hey, if you fall down, if you break your leg, don't meditate, go to the hospital. Right? We have a sick care system for a reason. It's not a healthcare system, it's a sick care system. But it works and it does save lives. When I crashed the motorcycle, I almost bled out. They saved my life. The ambulance saved my life. And then they took me to the hospital. The Norwegian word for hospital is sick house. It's not a place to get healthy, it's a place to get better from illness. And so, as I said, we don't have a healthcare system, we have a sick care system. When I healed myself, it came through interventions that were not taught in the standard system. We know that the standard allopathic system has a massive vested interest in earning money on sickness. As I say, good health makes a lot of sense, but it doesn't make a lot of dollars. And so the gift that I got from Creator, from Spirit, whatever you want to call it, was that I was given the opportunity to realize that I was the healer. As I say to my patients, the doctor can dress the wound, but only you as the patient can heal. There is no such thing as anyone else healing you. You are the healer. Yes, if you break a bone, the doctor can put it in place, but you're doing the healing. So my question to everyone listening and watching is, where have you outsourced the power of self-healing? And it doesn't mean that you don't use, powerful supplements or incredible tools for healing. We do use these and we are smart about it. But the thing is, the lesson for me, that I had outsourced it. I was going to the doctor saying, hey doc, how am I going? Am I healing? Am I getting better? And completely outsourcing the decision for myself that I was the one that was the healer. So I want to be clear that we do have a sick care system. It is very necessary to save lives, but it has very little or nothing to do with health. And so when I healed myself through the power of breath, I still did the standard medical allopathic model. So I graduated as a physician 2009. I opened up my first clinic 2010, folded after a year of trial and error. In 2011, I started my first multidisciplinary clinic. We scaled to 10 clinics and I had 75 different staff, 27 different physicians on my books. And this was a combination of medical doctors, dentists, nurses, scientists, chiropractors, naturopaths, yoga teachers, nutritionists, and so on and so forth. We had pathology, radiology, audiology, and many different kinds of modalities within the same structure. And I realized that. And so I have a lot of experience. I was managing 27 physicians at the same time while being a director and founder of this, or co-founder of this franchise. We created the largest yoga studio in Australasia, 1,200 square meter yoga studio. And so I just want to point out that for those listeners and viewers that are tuning in right now, I'm not yes, I am a little bit of the hippie guy that does the breathing, but trust me, I've done the science. I have educated.
I've been with you in person, a little squishy here and there.
There's definitely some hippie in there, but the science is real and it's been around for thousands of years. And I just find it interesting, Todd, that now science is finally catching up on what spirituality has been teaching for thousands of years.
Amazing. I mean, so the story, you healed yourself by breathing, right? So at that point you were learning, right? You were kind of a student at that point to some degree. Student becomes a professor eventually. You step into that and you're like, okay, oxygen feels good, right? You help yourself, you deep breathe. Maybe, going through your kind of the breath work that we did together was interesting for me. And it was something, again, I hadn't done. I think that when you say breath work, maybe get even down to the root basis of it. Like, what is it? And is it just breathing deeply? right? I know it's not exactly that, right? Tell us just from your perspective what it is and then what it does and then the variations of it. Because I know what we did is different than what I might do at home, for example. But let's start with that, if you don't mind.
Of course, great. And so firstly, I always ask my students, what do you believe about yourself? And this is very important, and there's a reason why we're starting here. Because we know that what we believe we will achieve. So placebo and nocebo effects are real. And in many peer-reviewed studies and many different kinds of research around the world, we see that placebo is often as effective, if not almost as effective, as the real drug or medicine. And so the belief in itself is fundamental. So as I say to my students, what do you believe about yourself? Do you believe, one, that you're only flesh and bone? That you're only matter, that you're only physical in nature? Or two, do you believe that there's more to you than just the physical, perhaps a spirit or a soul, some sort of consciousness or energy? We attract a lot of spiritually curious individuals, and so most of our students in our rooms will say, yeah, I believe that there's more. Okay, I'm spirit, I'm consciousness, I'm a soul having a human experience. And I'm not going to say either is right or wrong, but the question is important. As we know, then the question will define the belief, okay? So if you're listening, watching right now, just write it down. Do you believe that you're only the body, only flesh, only matter? One, or two, that you are spirit and consciousness, okay? If you believe that you're only matter, which is where a lot of fundamentalists will sit, then you are experiencing a very limited human experience, because the only experience that you can have is within the five senses, or six if you include thought. If you believe that you are consciousness, which is, of course, scientifically proven since 1918, when Max Planck won the Nobel Prize for this conversation, when he proved that there is a field of divine intelligence that exists and makes up all things. This is true in quantum mechanics. It's no longer esoteric. It's hardcore science, still true to this day. If you then believe that you are more than just the body, then the question is, what is breath? And for me, I had to almost die twice to learn this beautiful lesson. And breath in many indigenous languages is the same word as spirit and or life. And so I want you to consider this. Just open up your mind for a moment and think outside the clinical model. Just tune into your intuition. When you're born, what's the first thing that happens? You take your first breath.
Take a breath. Yeah.
Right. What's the last thing that happens when you die?
Take a breath.
Exactly. When you go without food for a while, you actually become much healthier. People used to think that you can do, a couple of days without food.
Don't even get me started.
Yeah. It's a long topic. My longest water fast is 30 days. I go multiple days on water every single month, and normally one day on water every week. But let's just say that you can't go as long. You can go longer without food than you think. How long can you go without water?
Not very long. I mean, in the end of it, as far as relative to food, I think you need more water.
Exactly. And it depends on the situation, the environment that you're in, but let's just say not as long as food. How long can you go without air?
Definitely not as long as you can go without water. You can only hold your breath for so long. So you need air. We all agree.
Air is the primary healing element. That's the key here. And so when you realize that when you're born, you take a breath, and you die, you take your last breath. Breath and spirit, breath and life is the same thing. It has the same meaning. Yes? In spirit, in spiritus, to inspire, same thing. And so the ancient ones were onto something here, Todd. They were realizing that when you breathe, you will tune into higher consciousness. And think about it. If you hold your breath for a long time, what happens? You lose consciousness. You don't die right away. You lose consciousness. Breath is consciousness. If you go to your ChatGPT or whatever and you type in the question, what percentage of my atoms are made up of empty space, you'll get the answer 99.9999999%. So scientifically proven we are energy. Scientifically proven there is a field of divine force, this intelligence, this innate intelligence that is who we are, and it's expressed through matter and into matter. And so then if we realize through the science that we are energy, that we are consciousness, that breath and consciousness is the same thing, then the question that I pose is, what if you're not sick? What if you're not stressed? What if you're not living in this stuck situation because of the situation? What if you're potentially sick and or frustrated and or not living your best life because you're not breathing properly? Okay? And here's the key. Most people are breathing through their mouth. So I'll give you some tangible stuff. If you breathe through your mouth, you're stimulating the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight system. And so most people, from meeting to meeting, you're rushing through life. Not everyone, but a lot. They're breathing through their mouth. And it's like pressing the on button on cortisol. It's like pressing the on button on stress. And so what we can do is we start to rewire. Instead of triggering what's called the phrenic nerve, the fight or flight response, we can begin to actually tone up the vagus nerve and actually begin to breathe through the nose. And just by breathing through the nose, you'll reduce cortisol, reduce stress levels, become more present. And you can see meditation, the primary anchor in meditation is breathing. Breath is life and breath is the key. Once you get this, once physicians learn this, and we start to share this with our patients, a lot of pharmacology and pharmaceutical interventions can reduce, because we don't need a drug when we learn to breathe properly. That is my hypothesis.
Interesting. So the breath that you're taking in general, you get down to, and I think this is where maybe we can touch on a little bit of the controversy, because we're not going to displace healthcare delivery, right, entirely like that. It doesn't work like that, right? But there's no argument against the idea that breathing more and breathing more properly is an aid in creating more wellness, better, just everything, your cortisol levels, your metabolic state, your just all overall energy changes, right? So I get the idea of meditation, the process of that. When you think about it, I mean, you're basically taking it down a process. You can't survive without breathing, right? But the healing processes really are centered around if somebody's not doing it properly, right? So if you're broken, right, let's say, and look at all the health issues, right? There's mental health, there's metabolic health, cancer, heart disease, traumas like you went through. The healing processes and oxygenation required to do that. There's a reason hyperbaric chambers work, right? So more oxygen infused helps your body, helps your healing processes, those types of things. So when you kind of cross wires from kind of the softer stuff around how does it make you feel? How does it move the needle? It definitely does. There's no question about that. How does it really tie in, and how are the clinical studies coming together around, I mean, you're obviously deeper in it than I am. Are there clinical studies coming together that really are driving towards the science of it? What happens when you do a breath session, and particularly maybe even a holotropic breath session like we did, right? That's more the definition of what we did, where you're almost not breathing properly to create that experience. So I guess there's some nuances to that, and I'd love to kind of get a sense from your perspective what that's like as a layperson in breath work, with maybe one day I won't be, right? It's something that's interesting to me to figure out, like, where does the softness connect to the clinical, and can it? How deep does it go?
Excellent question. So let's look into some of the science. There's been 18,000 research articles now, peer-reviewed research articles now on breathwork in the last 10 years, with over half of them coming out since 2010. So there is a tremendous amount of research coming out. I'll quote a couple. There's one called The Effect of Breathwork and Stress to Mental Health, which is a meta-analysis of a randomized clinical trial. It showed significant improvement in mental health when using breath correctly. Again, particularly two types of breathing, if I can be clear. Many types, but two primary types. The first thing, throughout the day, you should be a nose breather. That's why a lot of people, biohackers, athletes, will tape their mouth while sleeping, because they're reconditioning their nervous system to breathe through the nose. In fact, most really good athletes breathe through our nose when we run, when we train, and we only do mouth breath at the end of the session, because you'll actually reconfigure the nervous system. It's very powerful. And so the first part is, throughout the day, you should be breathing through your nose, and it should be breathing as little as possible. But then we have the transformational breathing, or the breakthrough type breathing that we did together, Todd, which is very active. And this is where we see a lot of healing. Now, the reason for this is because you're super oxygenating the body. Gary Brecka is a great functional medicine specialist. He's not a doctor, he's a researcher though, and he's been doing this for years. Gary Brecka, might want to look him up if you're in this space. And he says that all disease is a lack of oxygen. It's really simple. All disease is a lack of oxygen. And honestly, I couldn't agree more. There's a chronic lack of oxygen because there's a chronic lack of movement and a chronic lack of breathing. And again, if you're breathing through the mouth, you're breathing through the upper chest, you're not stimulating the vagus nerve appropriately, and you're staying in fight or flight. Okay, so that's a little bit of science, but also there's one called How Breath Can Control Your Life, which is a systematic review on psychophysiological correlations of slow breathing. What they found was a significant increase in quality of life when you change your breath. And the third one I quote is called Breathwork Interventions for Adults with Clinically Diagnosed Anxiety Disorders. And what they found is there was a notable, significant reduction in anxiety when using breath. And 12 months later, they were still experiencing benefits of breathwork, which, by the way, has zero side effects, unlike most drugs, and is completely free of charge. Now, if you want, what I'll do is I'll send a list of these articles so you can put them in your show notes as well.
Yeah, we'll definitely do that. And the articles would be helpful. I think, that part, first of all, I think a lot of people here know who Gary Breck is, and Gary's a smart guy. And again, he's not a doctor. There's some things I agree with about Gary and some things I probably don't agree with, just like everybody out there, right? But the idea of that oxygen really does drive some healing. I think we can all agree in a mental health state, in a lot of things, it can definitely be a contributor. I see that as being the articles I look forward to reading them. I read a bunch leading up to this. I was excited to talk to you about it. And I definitely found the experience of kind of the holotropic experience interesting. Like I haven't obviously done it again. I was with you personally in that situation, and it was interesting. It was an interesting feeling. And I didn't have some of the responses others do that are super emotional. And maybe that's based on my grounding and who I am or what I am. But I'm curious, is that what you experience quite often, from the same way? Because essentially the clinic, all right, over-oxygenating yourself. And to some degree, you're almost processing your own, like it's almost like you're taking in a lot more, almost creating a hyperventilating situation. So it's almost like you're creating something that puts your brain in a hypoxia state that then gives you those feelings that then can help you with that directive release. Maybe tell me what's happening there clinically when that happens. There's the big thinker, faith part and the connected part, but there's also like what's actually happening in your body.
Great question. Think about it. If you're having an experience of anxiety or stress, what normally happens is you start to breathe shallow and you start to really contract the body. So what we know is that the easiest way to explain it is that the thoughts, the language of the mind, and the emotions are the language of the body. And so we know that if you study epigenetics under the work of Dr. Bruce Lipton, for example, you'll find that 95% of what we do and experience throughout our reality in this human experience is what we call unconscious, okay? So you're not really aware of the things that you're doing. So 95% of what's happening throughout the day, including your thoughts, are things that you're not aware of. Okay, so if we come to terms with the fact that the absolute majority of our thoughts and our actions and what we're experiencing is subconscious, then we have to ask the question, to what degree does the subconscious mind play a role when it comes to health and healing? What we now know is that the conscious mind is, as you know, the prefrontal cortex. It can think, it can analyze, it can be cognitive, and it can reason. And that's wonderful, and that's really useful. However, the body, as a part of the subconscious mind, has stored the emotion, it has stored the trauma, it has stored the unprocessed stuff that you experienced in your life. And as we know also from Professor Bruce Lipton, he says that about 98% of the traumas and challenges that you're experiencing today have their roots in childhood. Now, if we study psychology, we'll see this as well. This is known as the imprint period, okay? So in the imprint period, there are traumas, there are experiences, things that have taken place. They're in the body. Okay, they're inside the cell, and it could be an emotion, it could be a fear, it could be anything like that. And so you and I can talk all day. You can go to a psychologist, and we can keep it cognitive, and we'll kind of get to the surface a little bit, but we're really just the tip of the iceberg. Imagine the analogy, we're just at the tip of the iceberg. To get to the core of the problem, we're talking cause and effect, one of the universal laws. To get to cause, we have to get into the subconscious or the unconscious mind, and we have to then use modalities, methods that aren't the standard critical thinking model. So how do we do it? Well, this is a great question. what we found, and we did this across all kinds of different therapies, somatic therapies, meditation therapies, journaling, all kinds of different movement, from yoga, from qigong, from different clinical sciences. The best way we found it is breathing. And so as you breathe, as you mentioned, for example, how many people in the breath work that we did had huge emotional releases. That's because breath trigger emotion, all right? Breath trigger emotion. Think about it. If you have an anxiety attack, what's going to happen? You're going to breathe. Right? Yep. If someone says, hey, you need to, relax, and we're trying to get someone to stress less, what do? Breathe. Right? How do we become mindful? Sit down in meditation and breathe. And so all of the experience and science is showing the same thing. However, as you mentioned, as you do a transformational breathwork session out, what you're doing is actually beginning to process what the body has been carrying. You're beginning to take the rocks out of the backpack. And I remember this. I had no idea of this. This was experiential for me. So this was 2008, when I started the breathing after the doctor said he has to cut my leg. And I'm starting to breathe in and out and in and out. And
I'd be hyperventilating already if somebody said they were going to cut my leg off, but
right. And I want to talk about that. I'll bring that back in a moment. But basically, I was breathing in and I was breathing out. And it's not hyperventilating. There's two types of it kind of is, but let's be clear. There's two types. One type of hyperventilation is when your nervous system is not in control. You're not in control, and it's just unconscious, like you're having a panic attack and you're hyperventilating. Right. The other type is when you are consciously doing it, and that's how you can process emotion. So when I started doing this and I was breathing in, I was breathing out, and I was feeling sensations, right? And I have visions of finding my brother passed away when he was 5. And as I'm breathing, I'm like, what is that? It has nothing to do with the fact that I'm trying to heal this infection, right? I'm breathing and I'm feeling the fear of not surviving. I'm breathing and I'm seeing myself being bullied as a 7-year-old kid because I couldn't read or write well in school. I'm breathing because I'm grieving my girlfriend that left me some years before that. I'm breathing and I'm getting angry because I didn't really love myself and accept myself at the time. And as I'm breathing, all this stuff's coming up. And I thought to myself, well, that has nothing to do with my health and healing, does it? And obviously that was the mind. And then my intuition, including my body, said it has everything to do with it. Everything to do with it. Again, the thoughts are the language of the mind, the emotions are the language of the body. If you want to heal your body, you really need to tune into the emotion, the energy that should be in motion. Again, by the law of, we call it the 12 universal laws. It's called the law of transmutational perpetual energy. Most people would have heard of it, that energy cannot be created nor destroyed. Energy, emotion, energy should be in motion. That is life. The faster, the higher the frequency, the more life. The slower the frequency, the more sickness and disease. When the emotion's stuck in the body and you haven't processed it, it's silly, but it's true. It becomes an issue in the tissue, okay? And we call it a diagnosis or a disease, but it's really just an unprocessed emotion.
Interesting. So you see this as a conductive, like something that goes along with traditional medicine while you're healing, but unlocking those feelings and the other components and scars and call whatever you want, baggage, and things that you've had unresolved are part of the healing process. I do think that that's true in a lot of situations with a combination of things, mental health and certainly brain, and activating your brain and stimulating it differently is definitely something that we see creates a force when dealing with, say, brain health, right? Like if the more in tune you are with what's happening, and the more you exercise it, and is that maybe that's a key word there? Like I go to the gym every day, right? Breath work in your mind is literally an exercise every day. It's working out a muscle that's going to help you navigate some of the challenges of whatever it is. So your health, your life, the environment, whatever's in front of you, right? How do you train yourself? Like, cause it's physical. It's a physical act, right? So to some degree, you want to go put on muscle. You go to the gym, you lift weights, you do the things that you need enough protein. There's certain things you do. So you want positive results in this area, what do you do? What's like the baseline to, I want to go all in, right? And I know you're the expert, so love to hear what you think.
Thank you for asking. Well, firstly, I think many people have heard of a guy called Wim Hof.
I can't say what I say when I get in my cold plunge, but I'm cussing Wim Hof's name if it's really cool. So I use that as like whatever, and I just power through it, right? So yes, of course.
And I love it. You know what's interesting about that is that he obviously started breaking world record after world record, and eventually they looked at him and said, "Okay, well, we want to do some studies," because the hypothesis, their belief was that it's just Wim. He's just a freak. You know, you can't just climb Mount Everest in sandals and a pair of shorts and not be a freak.
Yeah.
And then they realized that he was a superhuman in many ways, particularly when it came to his immune system. So we're talking healing here and we're talking health, right? So let's talk immune system. Then he said, no, it's not me, it's the breathing and it's the method. Okay. So they started doing clinical trials out of the Netherlands. They did 9 clinical trials in total out of hospitals, peer-reviewed, like solid studies. And what they realized is they took a group of people and they trained those individuals in the Wim Hof method. And what they found was that after injecting them with a deadly endotoxin, and they were doing the method, which is cold therapy, as you mentioned, and also breathing, they found that 80 to 90% of those, I can't recall, of those individuals who were not Wim Hof but trained in the method did not get sick from the endotoxin. So what did they prove? They proved that when you learn to breathe properly, you will supercharge your health and you will supercharge your immune system. Okay, so another bit of research for people to look into if they're interested. Now, to answer your question, there's 2 ways to do this. The most important thing is to start right now and to be aware of how many times throughout the day you are aware of your breath. Okay, this is the first step, the first place to start. As I say, the first path to mastery is self-discovery. You might not know that you're breathing through your mouth. You might not have been aware of how many times you've been aware of your breath over the last 24 hours. But let's start right now. So we'll take a breath and exhale. And that was one breath and we're aware of it. In 5 minutes time, we might do it again. And you might take a breath in through the nose and out through the nose. And now that's twice today that you've been aware of your breath. Now that's consciousness. That's the expansion of consciousness. And you want to see how often, how many times per day you can be aware of your breath. Slowing down, breathing through your nose into the lower belly, letting the belly hang out, and then relax. Okay? So that's practice number 1. That's for life. And trust me, it's going to cost you a lot if you don't, and it's going to cost you very little if you do. Like, what is it? A little bit of time? But what it does to the immune system, to the nervous system, to the stress response is phenomenal.
Yeah. Okay. Fair.
You know, as I say, it's literally, you're walking around
like
with
free things. The free things like paying attention to your breath. It's good.
Totally.
Right.
Totally. And you, as I say, you're walking around with the superpower hidden right underneath your nose. And most people have never trained in how to use it. So we start right now, every day, throughout the day, as many times as you can for the rest of your life. If you wish to do this for yourself, you get to breathe in through the nose into the lower belly, and as you exhale, you relax. And you can continue to do that for 5 minutes, or you can just do 1 or 2 or 3 breaths. I do it while on podcast interviews. I'll do it while in meetings. I'll do it while cooking my food. I'll do it while driving my car, and continuously reconfiguring my nervous system from fight or flight into rest and digest, from sympathetic survival to parasympathetic full presence. Okay, this is the key. That's the first practice. Okay, the second practice is to schedule time, like you mentioned, Todd, to actually sit down like you would with your meditation and actually practice a deep breathing experience. Now, again, you can go to YouTube, you can look up Wim Hof breathing. I'm sure many people have. You can go to YouTube, you can look up some of my breathwork experiences. My breathwork is called Quantum Breathwork. You can look up an incredible guy that I like to follow. This is going to be a great resource, I think, for your listeners, called Breathe with Sandy, Breathe with Sandy. Phenomenal breathwork channel on YouTube, and there's many, many, many more. And so when you do that, you scroll through your YouTube and you go, okay, I like that. This is a good one. I'll save that for tomorrow. Okay, and then you schedule time in your calendar. Your phone is on flight mode. Okay, don't open up your consciousness to the entire world until you've got yourself right in the morning. Like, charge your batteries, do you first. And as a part of that, when your phone is on flight mode, you press play on your YouTube, whatever. I have it downloaded so I don't have to turn my phone on, but you can use an iPad or whatever. And then you sit and or lie down and you breathe. And you just go through the experience and have no expectation. Just breathe and see what comes up.
That is a good practice. I think being intentional is basically what you're describing. Be intentional about what you do. And funny enough, while we're on this podcast, I'm intentionally breathing. We spent some time together, and I think you know me at least a little bit. The idea that having intention when you're actually thinking about what you're doing every day, and that is a practice I firmly believe in. I think that's a healing process, because if you have intention, you know what your mission and purpose is, you know what your drive is, you can actually do that. So if you have intention to breathe, that's a good one. I think spending time and doing things that feed your body and yourself and your mind and expand your mind is key. So you said 2. Are there 3? What's the third? There's always 3.
Yeah. The third one is breath work specifically for healing purposes.
Okay.
And this is what we do with our patients and our students. And so I'll give you an example. Like we were running clinical trials and we would have, our patients come in and see the medical doctor and do a series of blood tests, functional medicine tests, whatever was required. So we'd get the data. Then they would go to the chiropractors and get their spine assessed and get x-rays of the spine, because again, a healthy spine is a healthy life. Hippocrates said, in disease, first look to the spine, which is interesting. They would see the dentist to make sure that they didn't have any amalgam or any, root canal. I don't know if anyone's seen the movie Root Cause, but that's definitely worth watching. It was taken off Netflix because, well, there was some controversial stuff there. But let's just say that root canals aren't necessarily that good. I think 95% of...
There's a lot happening in that space, as well as people removing hardware, any cavities, those types of things. There's a lot of thoughts around that in the kind of longevity community, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I agree with it. I think 90+% of all root canals have parasitic infections and bacterial type infections that are really dangerous. So it's something to consider anyway. And so anyway, our patients would go and see the holistic dentists and they would, create a customized plan. And we would get really great results with our patients. But what we found is that behavior didn't change. Okay, so some would maybe stop drinking alcohol for a while and often they would start. Okay, and they would say that they were going to do a water fast, but they would eat clean, and then sometimes they would, get back off it. And we really realized that there was great results, but the consistency didn't really change. So then we started asking the question, what is really quality of life? Right? What is quality of life? And you can say absence of disease, all these things are accurate, but really the answer that we defined was the quality of life equals the quality of your emotions. So if you're experiencing, as I say, procrastination, hesitation, frustration, desperation, and depression type symptoms or feelings, then you perceive your quality of life to be low. If you're experiencing love, peace, joy, enthusiasm, and gratitude as your primary states of emotion, then you perceive your quality of life to be high. So the quality of our life literally equals the quality of our emotions. How do we then change those emotions? Well, again, we have to go back to the earlier stages of life, or at least to the past, find the trauma and change it within an experience. And so we realized that the emotion had a lot to do with it. An example is, why does a person eat the way they eat? Well, you could say that maybe they're hungry or they're thirsty, or maybe they have a parasite infection, which most people do. They've never actually done a gut biome test, so they don't even know that they have parasite infections.
Totally.
Crazy. Like 9 out of 10 people have an undiagnosed parasite infection, is what we found with our patients. But what we realized is that this really does come down to a lack of breathing or breathing incorrectly. So what we did is we did a trial, a control group, where we took functional medicine patients that have gone through that, and they just kept on the same journey. Nothing changed. They were requested to eat clean, to move their bodies, to do all the things, meditate, whatever. And we took the control group, which did exactly the same, but they did breath work as well. And what we found was insane. The results improved so much with everything. And we saw this on blood tests. We saw this on functional MRI scans. We saw this on quality of life score metrics across the board. Where those who were doing breath work were outdoing the other ones like 10 to 1. Then we did another interesting study, which is we took the control group again of another bunch of patients. There was 20 patients at the time, and they did the functional medicine tests, which means that they saw the medical doctor, they saw the chiropractor, they saw the dentist, they saw the naturopath, they changed their eating, they did the yoga, they did the thing, right? And we took another control study that continued on whatever they were doing, did not change, did not have the functional medicine side of things, but did breath work alone. Okay, just breath work, not the other interventions. And the results that we found were almost the same as those who were doing the clinical stuff, the regenerative and functional medicine stuff, on a clinical level, blood tests and that's all. But in quality of life, it outdid it again, 10 to 1. So when it comes to quality of life, emotion, health and well-being in terms of mental and emotional states, breathwork is by far the most powerful methodology. So we don't have to choose either or. We can do functional regenerative medicine, the amazing stuff that you share. We can do the meditation, and if we combine it with breath, if you do it properly, I would say you'd be healing very, very quickly, much faster than you might expect. And this is, of course, not a promise, but I invite people to consider a 30-day breathwork challenge. Log it before, during, and after, and look at the results for yourself.
You said something a minute ago. People start something and they don't finish it, like their motivation or whatever. What we find in a lot of our practices is that if you can't measure it, people don't really tangibly feel it, right? So you think about, let's just take heart disease, right? We had there's a major problem in the world with heart disease. I'd say a significant percentage of Americans, 60% of the heart attacks people have, they die. It's their last one. 18 million Americans die of heart attacks every year, or really worldwide, I think, is 18 million. There's diagnostics out there that can actually determine whether you have cardiovascular disease. Now they can actually look into your arteries and tell you. So it's not a secret, right? Like, nobody should die of a heart attack today. It shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. But until they see inside an artery that they have a certain percentage of blockage, they don't change a thing, okay? And my theory is everybody needs the diagnostics to actually have a measure and a baseline. And that's the question. What do we measure, right? Is it all the regular health metrics that we measure? And then how do you measure if somebody's more joyful, right? Like, so to me, emotions are hard for people to interpret, right? Like, a lot of people don't know what they are, and what they're feeling may not be even, okay. In America, everybody says, oh, the pursuit of happiness, and everybody knows what happiness is, right? Do they? I don't know that they do, right? Not if you're comparing yourself to the people next door and is it things like, what is happiness, right? So when you start to talk about joy and you start to talk about quantifying joy or quantifying emotions, it's really hard, right? And educating people on what proper feelings are, especially if they've had trauma as a kid. I mean, I can tell you, I've known plenty that have had those traumas. I've worked with plenty. I've also helped them work through some of those things. And it's not easy, right? Letting go of some of those things, and feelings are real. Nobody's going to argue that, right? And feelings can bring you towards something that is a challenge for you, that locks you up and can make you sick, right? I agree with all of those things. How do you actually measure? And is it the same clinical measurement that we need in, a program where we're going through the functional medicine root cause determinations, the microbiome? How do you fix it if you don't know, right? So you have to measure it, but then you have to kind of find that next. So what are your thoughts there? Anything resonate there? Because feelings are tangible to people. It's real. I get it. You don't discount. If I discounted when my daughter was 13, if I discounted her feelings, Lord knows, right? Look out. Okay. So, and she'll watch this and laugh. She'll be like, yeah, he did discount my feelings, probably. But we definitely far surpassed that, because I didn't understand, right? So maybe give me some thoughts on that, if you don't mind.
I love this, because you are at the peak of your game on a global level when it comes to the functional medicine, the testing, all the things that we've discussed, like even some of the investments that you're working on at the moment, how people can have, laboratories in their house where a blood prick will give them the diagnosis of what's happening in their blood in a fraction of a second without needing to go to a medical doctor. Normally 90% of cases not be referred for the bloods that you need, but rather a handful of standard tests looking for sickness, not for function. And then, having to go to a pathology lab, book an appointment, get the bloods done, wait in line, have it sent off, multiple days sometimes for it to come back, for you to have to go.
Even weeks. It takes weeks.
Weeks sometimes. Then for the patient to have to go back to the doctor, line up again, pay again, depending, obviously, and then get their results And again, the tests that were done were less than 10% of what really is on the spectrum to test. You've now innovated to the point where they can have a machine in their house or in their community, put their finger on it, get a blood prick done, and get the results immediately. And it's a broad spectrum analysis. I mean, what you guys are doing is absolutely cutting edge. So we can't get around this. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what I got from our last conversation. Is that about right?
Yeah, no, yeah. Maybe certain panels take a little longer, and but we're creating access, and just like you mentioned, the microbiome diagnostics. There, we're investing in that. We see a tremendous amount of opportunity to proactively diagnose disease early, catch it early, and treat it early. If we can do that, the world is going to become much more effective at healthcare delivery. We're going to have to be able to reduce the cost of it. It won't be such a burden to people, and it will be able to democratize it, which is one of the key things that we're really focused on. Not only how do we do it scientifically, but how do we really create access for everyone? Most people aren't educated enough to know what a scan is or how they diagnose something or what process to go through. And, that's our purpose, is to really drive that education, drive that knowledge, and create access. And if we can do all those things, while we impact the healthcare delivery, then we're doing good things. That's, when you ask me my legacy, that's the thing for me.
It blew me away. I got a full body truth bump. They call it goosebumps, but I say no one's a goose here. I got a full body truth bump when you told me. And, actually yesterday I interviewed Dr. Ash Kapoor, who was also at the gathering.
Yeah. I saw that actually. I watched it. It was great. But tell me what your thoughts were about that. Ash
See if you can get him on your podcast. It'll be brilliant. But basically, he's been a medical doctor for 30 years, peak of his game in the NHS. And he's just gone, you know what? 30 years of being a medical doctor, over and over again. The tests are important because you need the data. But he goes, overall, the treatment is almost identical for different patients. Outside of the standard pharmaceutical model, it is breathwork. It is fasting. It is cleaning up your gut biome. It's the basics. It's the movement. It's the sunshine. It's all of those things that Mother Nature has been teaching for millions of years.
Get off the couch. How about that?
It's so simple, right? And so to be clear, like the functional medicine side of things, the tests, like I geek out on that. I've got my chronological age is 42. My biological age is currently 24, based on 2 different tests. So I've been able to reverse my age, and the thing that reversed my age faster than anything else is water fasting. Honestly, not eating as much food.
Interesting. And that's for how long? How you're doing it days a week, days a month, you said? Or I'm interested to hear what your practice is there.
It depends on stage.
It's a lot higher than yours. And my biological age, definitely lower than my actual age. It's 38, but
right.
My actual age is 56. So
that's what I mean. That's incredible.
Yeah.
And it's possible.
It's
possible.
Right?
And it's absolutely, you can get a true age test, which I did, and also a glycan test, GLYCAN. That's one of the most inexpensive ones. And the true age is probably TRU, which is probably the most accurate one at the moment. But the key to it is, to answer your question, like, how do we go about it? Yes, get the data. If you don't have access to these kind of tests, go to a naturopath, do the functional medicine test, get a functional medicine doctor, like do as many tests as you can. Look at your gut biome, look at your blood analysis, look at your hormone analysis, test your heavy metals. You can do that through a hair strand analysis, like what heavy metals do you have in your body, and so on and so forth.
I said exactly, or you're spot on the testing. Because if you don't know, you can't do anything about it. And to me, that's a key thing. We have about 10 minutes, and there's a couple of things that I think might resonate with people where you come from. You've already talked about some of them, but what's the number one health myth that you think is out there right now that needs to be demythified instead of demystified? But the myth that's out there that we should tell the listeners about.
I'll share a very quick story. And this is not from a religious perspective, but from a perspective where I hope that you will recognize yourself in this story. So there's an old story about the conversation between creator and man. And in the start of this creation of this amazing, planet and human experience, creator is having a conversation with man. And the topic of the conversation is the power, the wisdom, and the unconditional love of the entire multiverse. And so creator asks man, what do you think we should do with the power, the wisdom, and the unconditional love of the entire multiverse. Man looks at Creator and says, we should hide it. We should hide it at the top of the mountain, the tallest mountain, for there mankind will never find it. Okay, says Creator, looks at man and says, well, you see, one day when mankind is evolved enough, they will be able to climb that mountain. And when they do, then they will find it. Okay, says man, then we should hide it at the depths of the deepest sea, for surely there they will never find it. Creator looks at his creation, smiles and says, well, one day when mankind is evolved enough, they will go there. And when they do, they will find it. Okay, says man, well, I don't know. And so Creator kneels down, leans in, smiles and says, why don't we take the power, the wisdom, and the unconditional love of the entire multiverse and place it right there in the middle of themselves. For you see, one day, dear child, when mankind is evolved enough, they will go there. And when they do, they will find it. So the answer to my question is simple. You have the power, the wisdom, and the unconditional love of the entire multiverse inside of you. That is your consciousness. That is your love. That is healing, and that is medicine. When you recognize that you hold this key, nothing outside of you will ever suffice again. It's truly an inside job.
Interesting. That's a strong myth that the inside job is attainable by everybody, not just people that have or have not, right? Like it's the prototypical aspect of it. It's an interesting one. And I appreciate the story and the thought. You're much better at, I'm good at situational humor or situational context. You're a real storyteller. It's fun to listen and talk with you, and it's been enjoyable. Tell me, I think I already know the answer to this, but the daily practice you never skip.
Great. Breath. But honestly, the daily practice for each individual is a practice in itself. That's the key. You just need to make sure that if you need to go to bed an hour early, go to bed an hour early. But you get up in the morning, leave your phone on flight mode, get up before the kids, before the husband or the wife, and do you. I mean, maybe it's walking in nature. Maybe it's like you and I, exercise, breathwork, and ice bath. And let's be honest, no one is comfortable in the ice bath. We don't do it because we're comfortable. We do it because we're getting uncomfortable, right? When you trigger that part of your brain, that part of the brain grows, and you learn to get uncomfortable in the morning. I'll tell you one thing, stress in your family, stress in your work, it's going to feel like a breeze because you've done the ice. Okay? Yeah. It's a mindset thing. So honestly, the most important practice that I do is breathing and fasting. They're the key aspects. I'm 5% body fat. I've got a lot of muscle. I eat about half now of what I did 10 years ago, and I have not lost any muscle. Okay, so the whole myth, I got to eat a whole bunch of food to maintain for some people, for ectomorphs maybe, but for most people not. So the most important thing is that you have a practice in the morning when your phone is on flight mode, and you do not miss it. Do that for 30 days and your life will change.
So Espen, last question. We're down to the wire here, and it's been a great conversation. I really appreciate the time. We always ask who we should interview next on the podcast, or if you have other people that have really influenced you and your thought process. Who would that be? And we'll try to track them down, maybe with some help to get them on the podcast.
Yeah, so in regards to your question, there's some absolutely revolutionary human beings. So the first one I'd recommend is a gentleman by the name of Dr. Zach Bush. I shared a stage with Dr. Zach Bush on behalf of the Abu Dhabi government earlier this year, and he's contracted by governments and consulting for governments and royal families around the world for his revolutionary approach. So I'm happy to make an introduction to Dr. Zach if you wish. And of course also Dr. Bruce Lipton. Dr. Bruce Lipton is the founder and the guy that created or discovered epigenetics and has changed the game completely. Epigenetics, epi meaning above the genes, or epi meaning above, so control above the gene. And his book, which is just revolutionary, called The Biology of Belief. So I'd suggest Dr. Zach Bush, Dr. Bruce Lipton, and I can send you a list of others as well, but that's definitely going to be two amazing conversations. And also one more thing, a good friend of mine, Dr. John DeMartini. I'm sure you've heard of John, but if you need an introduction, let me know. He's also just phenomenal. And any final thoughts? People want to get in touch with me, you can send me a message on Instagram, which is dr_Espen, which is my first name. So that's dr_ESP for Peter, E for Echo, N for Norway. So Dr. Espen on Instagram, and also drespen.com. Just drop me a line. If you have any questions, go to the website. There you can see our upcoming events, the breathwork. We have a breathwork membership, which is quite incredible. It's $10 a week. You can opt out at any time. And every single week, We breathe in live breathwork experience. It's almost like a breathwork experience / ceremony every single week. So you can find that on the website. Any questions, you can always just reach out to my team on LinkedIn or WhatsApp. And really an honor to be here with you. And thank you again, Todd, for the incredible work that you are doing, really changing the world. And I don't mean that in any other sense than literally. And it's an honor to be able to have these conversations and be on this call. So thank you so much for having me today.
I want to really thank you, Espen, for joining us. It's been a complete pleasure to listen to your story, hear what's happened in your life and what's brought you to this mission and purpose. And it's been very informative around really what breathwork can do and how we can have an impact on other people's lives. So we really appreciate it. From a Killer Cure perspective, we really appreciate you listening. And we look forward to the next episodes that are coming up. We have Stephen Ibaraki coming on in the next several weeks, in addition to a scientist that has invented a process of reversing heart disease completely. Bill Liao will be back on the show. He's coming back from some bereavement leave, and we missed him, but we'll look forward to having him on, and we'll look forward to seeing you all again soon.